Aloha to Adam.
My name is Adam. I'm an alcoholic. You guys can hear me? I want
Yes.
to thank the group. Thank you for inviting me to come talk this evening. It's an honor and a privilege to be asked to participate in AA. It's a responsibility to give back what was so freely given to me. Welcome to the people that are new. Being in this part of the book, I think that it's very important that I understand, if I've got to this part of the book, that I've done a huge amount of work in the big book to get to this place. And, you know, we talk about a further demonstration of these principles lies in our respective homes, occupations, and affairs. And I started to understand much later that there's a lot of integrity in the big book. And if you think about who sends an alcoholic to AA, it's usually the family, the wife, or the employer. And you look at the chapter to wives, the family afterward, and the chapter to the employers, respectively, because each of those are going to be somewhat very, very important in my long-term recovery. And I've worked with a lot of people. One of the things that I see with people when I look at failure in alcoholics with new people is that they get very mesmerized by finance and romance. They get very mesmerized. Either their employment or their relationship somehow becomes incompatible with their recovery, and we lose a lot of people there. So when we look at this part of the book, it becomes very, very important to listen to what we're saying. So we're right in the middle of page 131. I'm going to start. Drinking isolates most homes from the outside world. Okay, father, and this is not gender specific, but the alcoholic may have laid aside for years all normal activities. And that's a very, very important thing to understand, that this thing is like a tornado, very much like Wilson had talked about earlier in the book. It ravishes the family. And they're going to talk about a couple things here about jealousy. And I think it's very important, because if you've ever been to Bill Wilson's house in Bedford Hills, you'll see a boomerang and a shoe right when you walk in. And the curator of that museum will explain to you what that shoe is. And that was where Lois Wilson had thrown that shoe at Bill, because he was just as unavailable when he got into recovery as he was when he was drinking. I actually had an ex-girlfriend look at me and say, Adam, I liked you better when you were drinking. And I said, why? And she said, well, because I could control you. So here it goes. Father may have laid aside for years all normal activities, clubs, civic duties, sports. When he renews interest in such things, a feeling of jealousy may arise. Now, you have to understand, the family is expecting the father or the mother or the alcoholic in what we call a dysfunctional family to suddenly renew their almost like nuclear family and become a center of that family. And it typically doesn't happen like that. And a lot of people end up getting divorced after the alcoholic gets sober. And I think it's very important to understand that. The family may feel they hold a mortgage on dad or mom or the alcoholic. Remember, this is not gender specific. So big that no equity should be left for outsiders. In other words, they want to dominate his recovery. And this is where sometimes it causes more damage for the alcoholic that is suddenly so amazed by his new life and his new friends, or her life and her friends, that it becomes a tug of war in the family. We talk about in AA, the genetics loads the gun, the dysfunction pulls the trigger, the first and second half of step one. And a lot of this second half of step one is me needing to play God in my life. And what happens, you have to realize, is a lot of times the family hasn't done the 12 steps. They don't understand the actor trying to be the director, trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, and the scenery, which could be my family, my career, and my relationship. They don't understand these fundamental ideas that if you're an alcoholic like me, we've done all that work up to this point. So we understand when it says the Florida businessman laying in the sunshine complaining about the state of the nation, the reformer thinking the world would be utopia if anyone behaved, right? The minister sighing at the sins of the 20th century, and the safecracker who plays the victim. Each one of those four characters in that part of the book has a delusion, and the delusion is that if people would change, only then could I be happy. That has to be broken. And most of us as alcoholics suddenly discover that the Florida businessman, he's like, the finger pointer, the reformer, the minister. Each one of those has the same delusion that if people would change, only then could I be happy. But they're looking at it from a different angle. So when we get to the family afterward, you're going to see this tug of war, this power struggle that happens. And if the family and the relationship with that family is not compatible with a human being's recovery, I couldn't be around my family for 5 years. I could not be around her. And fortunate for me, my mom had moved. She sold the family property. She moved and she did not leave a forwarding address when I was in institution. That's where I left my mother. And fortunate for me, for those first 5 years, I'd done all of this work. I had taken 12 traditions off the wall and I started to apply them to my family. Our common welfare comes first. Our family, right? Our relationship depends on our unity. Understanding what that unity is for our relationship's purpose, for our family's purpose, there's a loving God. And we're going to talk about that in the next paragraph, how religion and God becomes the center. Are we spiritually centered instead of self-centered? So it's very, very important to understand this. Because if I don't know how to apply the traditions here to family, to relationships, and even in my employment, you can take a mission statement as a corporation and start to apply these fundamental ideas, and they're the same, right? What is our requirement for membership in this family? It's a desire to be together. Do we have a desire? Because it looks like the father doesn't. He has a desire to be at the meeting, to work with new people, to do all these other things. But at the same time, I think if a human being has gone through the 12 steps, he's one of the most important things I see in my life. If people ask me what I really learned from Alcoholics Anonymous, it was about being considerate. It was about being able to see the big picture. And if I'm at this place now and I've done all this work, I'm going to start to be able to see the big picture, that I need to have time for family. There is a place and a time for everything. And it's very important for me to be able to do that, because I can abandon my family just as easy in AA as I did with alcohol. And that causes more resentment. So I have to be careful of this. And again, people are really inconsiderate. This is something that I had to be aware of. So instead of developing new channels of activities themselves, mother and children demand that he stay home and make up for the deficiency. Now, the point here, again, if I really understand it, is that I would hope that when I was looking at that 6th chapter, where it talks about these different types of prayer, if you look at the word ask between 84 and 88, it's mentioned 6 times. 5 of those times, they are a prayer. We ask God to direct our thinking, to be divorced from self-pity. We ask God to be divorced from self-will. We ask God for forgiveness. But that last one is where we ask our family to join us in meditation. So what I've done there, if I've actually followed those directions, is when I come to this part of the book, I've actually asked my family to be part of my spiritual life. And that's a powerful, powerful thing. And it may not work that way. It may be a much more practical spiritual life. And as a lot of us know, I'm not pontificating here, but part of the word spiritual is ritual. And what I've discovered is that these 3 fundamental ideas, protected by God, accepted by self, and connected to a community, that community doesn't just have to be Alcoholics Anonymous. That community has to be in my family. And what I've learned to do is to, if I can really apply the traditions in my family, I can find out what our commonalities are. And I can learn to build on that. It's very, very important, because the family is going to look at me and want to dominate me in the same way as I want to move in another direction. At the very beginning, the couple ought to frankly face the fact that each will have to yield here. Okay. In other words, we have to be flexible here. This is about common sense. It's just like, the family that prays together stays together. We've all heard that stuff. I'm sorry. AA is a God-centered program, in my opinion. And I'm asking now the family to be part of that. That may not work for everybody, but for me, it has worked for me. Okay. So it says, if there is a family that's going to play an effective part in the new life. So again, what is the new life? The new life really for me is the manifestation of 10, 11, and 12. And 10, 11, and 12 really, when I really look at what 10, 11, and 12 is and how it interfaces with the problem, if I don't understand what the problem is, the solution's not going to work. If the problem is alcohol, the solution is abstinence. And all AA is the Sober Elks Club. But the problem really is what the book said it was. This restlessness, this irritability, this discontentment, right? And it's what it is irritability of the mind, restlessness of the body, and discontentment of the spirit. Then the new life that they're talking about is the mindfulness of 10, the vigilance of watching for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. These ideas where I have what we call transparency with my family. I have accountability with my family, not just with a sponsor, but I'm able to watch for these things. I'm able to admit my faults. I am able to discuss them with someone. I'm able to ask God to remove them. I'm able to set wrongs right as I go along. If you look at the words in 10, immediately, at once, promptly. I mean, if you're going to eat crow, wouldn't you want to do it while it's still warm? See, these principles I'm going to start to enact in my family. If I can't do it at home, if I'm going to meetings and talking about how spiritual I am and then dragging the wife around by her hair and kicking the dog, people do it. Father will necessarily spend much time with other alcoholics. That's part of the deal, okay? But this activity should be balanced. This is where and people talk about balance a lot. My sponsor didn't like the word balance. He said that a lot of people that talked about balance ended up losing their balance. He asked me to lean into AA. He asked me to lean as hard as I could into Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was there for my family, but this was very, very important. New acquaintances who know nothing of alcoholism might be made and thoughtful consideration given their needs. The problem of the community might engage attention, okay? Though the family has no religious connection, they may wish to make contact with or take membership in a religious body. Sound familiar? That came right out of the end of chapter 6. We see where religious people are right. This is a very, very hard thing to talk about because Alcoholics Anonymous has become very neutral. It's a spiritual program, not a religious program. But I think it's important to talk about this in my life. And when I work with new people, because I had a lot of mathematical and scientific education. I had calculus in high school. I had physics. I understand velocity, centrifugal force, inertia, gravity. And one of the questions in We Agnostics was, why wouldn't there be spiritual principles? Why wouldn't there just be some fundamental ideas that if I follow these ideas in my daily life, like treating people's feelings like I would want them to treat mine, right? Fundamental ideas. These ideas over a period of time began to become spiritual ideas for me. And I don't want to turn this into a religious idea, but this is just a little food for thought. In 1939, when the Big Book was published, the Oxford group met at the Hollywood Bowl, very close to where I live. Believe it or not, you can look it up on your phone, Oxford Group 1939 Hollywood Bowl. 30,000 people went to that meeting, okay? And they had a belief. There's a word called enthusiasm. We've all heard the word. It means theos. It means filled with the Spirit of God. You'll see the word enthusiasm and inspiration in the 11th step in the Big Book. But what they felt was there were 4 things that blocked a person from God. And this is what they are. 1, a dubious luxury I will not forego. 2, a secret I will not confess. 3, a restitution I will not make. And 4, someone I will not forgive. And what they believed is a person was cleared of those 4 things, the light of God for those that believe and the light of the Spirit for those of agnostic temperament would shine through that person like a beacon and they would be forever changed. What they called that in 1939 was a conversion experience. We call it a spiritual awakening. But if you really look at the 4 things that we watch for, selfishness, the dubious luxuries I will not forego, dishonesty, the secrets I will not confess, resentment, the restitutions I will not make, right? Or someone I will not forgive, and fear, the restitutions I will not make. Very, very simple ideas. They asked Michelangelo how he made the statue of David, and Michelangelo said he never really made the statue of David. I just chipped away everything that wasn't David, and there he was. And what I believe in my experience is that to have the family also be part of this. Because if I've done this work, and this is how Al-Anon really started. And when I look at the chapter to wives, the family afterward, and the chapter to the employers, I really look at a lot of these ideas from the perspective of Al-Anon. And working with new people, especially millennials, you know that we don't use words like trauma. We didn't use words like codependency. We didn't use words like enabling in 1939. But one of the things that I've done is, and I have two books here. The other book that I use has 4 highlighters, and it goes through the big book, Prayers, Promises, Warnings, and Directions. And if you take chapter 7, Working with Others, you will see there are 39 specific directions on working with others, specifically on what to do. The fundamental idea with most of it is not to work harder at someone's recovery than they are, because a lot of people get burned in sponsorship, or they get burned out in sponsorship because of their inability to redirect a sponsee back to the 12 steps. In other words, if you want to get rid of a sponsee, just ask them to write a 4-step. And with the guys I work with, I ask them to write an inventory before they call me. I lose most of them right there. But my sponsors will write the inventory, then call me back and read me the inventory. But just imagine if the family also, and the problem is this, is that a lot of family members are not going to do this. They're not going to do any of this. And that was what happened with me. My mom's brother committed suicide drunk. My father's brother committed suicide drunk. I come from a long line of suicide, mental illness, and alcoholism. And what I've learned to do is to not take a lot of that stuff personally. You ever wonder why your family pushes your buttons? It's because they installed them. And what's going to happen if you're new is that, first of all, I have a button on my forehead that says push me, okay? And what happens is you push that button, I do an emotional dance, and then I blame you. That's what I do, even though I can't see that. See, normal people seem to be intellect over emotion. They think, they process, and they act. I'm the opposite. I'm emotion over intellect. I act, process, and then think. Oops, 10th step, right? So what happens here is I have to understand that there's a good chance the family's not going to change. I'm in a perfect world, in a utopian world, we would all go through the steps together as a group, as a family. Wouldn't that be great? Never going to happen. But I'm talking about what if it did. So keep going here. Alcoholics who have derided religious people, right, will be helpful by such contacts. Be helped by such contacts. Being possessed of a spiritual experience, that would be me or someone that's gone through the book and had this type of awakening. Okay, the alcoholic will find he has much in common with these people. So this is a really interesting thing, because what happens is this. It's like in New York, they call it the Atlantic. Over here, we call it the Pacific. In Chicago, they call it Lake Michigan, right? But if you haven't noticed, it's all water, right? So what I've discovered is, as I go through this spiritual process, all of a sudden, I do see where religious people are right. And I'm not going to get into the Lord's Prayer tonight, but I remember even Clancy having a big argument about the Lord's Prayer. And there's a video of these 2 rabbis that say the Lord's Prayer is not a Christian prayer, it's a Jewish prayer. And they go through this whole thing with the Lord's Prayer, and they take it apart. And what I've discovered is, thy will be done is the 3rd step. Lead us not into temptation, 6 and 7. Forgive us our trespasses, 8 and 9. Kingdom, power, and the glory is 10, 11, and 12. It's as clear as a bell. And although it's religious, it is still a spiritual idea. And the idea seems to be compatible with all religions. That once I become forgiving, once I become helpful, once I become kind to my enemies without being subservient. One of my friends here in LA is worth, he's, I think 900 million or something. He says, Adam, there's 2 kinds of people on this earth. There's guests and there's hosts. And if you haven't noticed, the guest is never happy. There's no onions on my burger. I asked for a king-size bed. I can't believe I got an economy car. I don't like the hotel. I mean, some of us live with guests. They're redecorating our house every month, right? The guest is never happy. But see, what I've discovered is, to become the host is very much what Bill Wilson did. And what Alcoholics Anonymous, these steps coming up to this point where we're talking about, I'm going to read this again, it'll make more sense after I read it, is that what happened to Bill is what happened to me. Is I realized I may have the mind of a king, but in order to recover in Alcoholics Anonymous, I must have the heart of a servant. And most people that you will see in these religious bodies that are spiritual, they're all helpful. They all come from a place of kindness and love. Instead of being selfish and self-centered, I become God-centered, service-centered, other-centered. Okay. So now I really do have something in common with these people. Once I get rid of the things that are blocking me, right? Suddenly, it's like you tell a kid, go in your room and straighten out your room. He doesn't want to do it. You tell that same young person, go in your room and throw out all your old stuff. We'll buy you new stuff. How long would that take? So that's the soul surgery. If I've done that part of the work, when I come to this part, right? Alcoholics who have derided religious people, right? This is before I had a spiritual awakening, will be helped by such contacts. Being possessed, now this is after the spiritual awakening, being possessed of a spiritual experience, right? The 12th step now, right? The culmination of all the other work that I've done. The alcoholic, that's me, someone that's had an awakening, will find he has much in common with these people. If you find you don't, you might want to go back and do the work again. Okay, because what happens is I do have a lot in common with these people. Suddenly, things like charity, kindness, look at the virtues behind the 7 deadly sins. Where there's pride, there's humility. Where there's anger, there's temperance. Where there's greed, there's charity. Where there's lust, there's chastity, right? So each of these virtues that stands next to the defect in the 12 and 12 becomes compatible with the most spiritual people on earth. Very, very interesting. It's almost like a Jedi mind trick that brought me to be a good person. It's just crazy. And you know what happens when you're a good person? You do good things. My buddy goes, if you're tired of eating poop sandwiches, quit making them. People always talk about, I got low self-esteem. I'm like, what are you doing? Alcoholics Anonymous is demanding that I be helpful, that I take commitments, that I work with new people. And I do. If you can't do the work at AA and continue to hate yourself, it doesn't work like that. So here it is. Alcoholics who have derided religious people. I know I'm reading it again. Okay. That means put them down. Okay. Could be helped by such context, being possessed of a spiritual experience. Now I've had a spiritual experience. I will find that I have much in common with these people, though I may. And one of the things I would suggest if you're new, if you want to do a really interesting experiment, starting with Bill's story, take Bill out of the story. Take golf out of the story. Take gender out of the story. Take World War I out of the story. Okay. Take it all out and ask these questions. Did I drink like Bill? Did I think like Bill? Did I feel like Bill? Was I as hopeless as Bill? Look at Bill's grandiosity, Bill's sensitivity, Bill's emotional immaturity, and Bill's omnipotence, which is his fight against God. Those are 8 fundamental ideas. If I look at Bill's story from those 8 ideas, it's magnificent. You will see the progression of Bill's story: fun with problems, just problems, magic, medicine, misery. In the center, he says liquor ceased to be a luxury and became a necessity. You will see the progression. So in this part of the book on page 132, I'm going to start reading it from first person, right? I may differ from them on matters. If I do not argue about religion, I'll make new friends. Look at, put your name in here. If I put I in here, some of these statements make a lot more sense to me, okay? I may make new friends. I'm sure to find new avenues of uselessness and pleasure. How interesting is that? My family can be the bright spot in such congregations, right? I may bring new hope and new courage to many a priest, minister, or rabbi. It's amazing how we connect with these people. I heard this great story. I'm going to repeat it because, you know, a lot of us use bad language in AA, and, you know, we'll say stuff like, I don't care, I'm going to say whatever I want. And I was in a car with a couple old timers one day, and they were talking about they had brought a priest from a really big mega church to one of the meetings that they were going to. And the speaker was okay, but the speaker was dropping F-bombs for an entire hour. F this, F that, F this, F that. And they asked this priest from this mega church. He was the priest of a church with like, 2,000 or 3,000 people. They said, "What do you think of AA?" And he said, "I loved AA, but I would never send any of my congregation there." And I never realized that just a little thing like that could have such a negative effect on us. It's not necessary that our common welfare comes first. How powerful was that story that I realized then that, because that priest, that person that saw all those 1,000 people, how many of those people, probably 1 out of 10 of them was there because they were an alcoholic or an addict. And we had an opportunity to help those people. So I think we do have a duty and a responsibility. So it's very interesting. He will make new friends. He is sure to find new avenues of usefulness and pleasure. Now, if I were you, I would read that from first person. I will make new friends if I investigate some of these religious bodies. And I'm sure to find new avenues. Me and my family can be the bright spot in such congregations. Have you ever noticed in Bill's story, the 3 pieces at the end of the story where it says, Lois and I abandon ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other drunks? That was the second of 3 pieces that became AA. And the third piece was, it said, we attend meetings frequently, not so we can feel better. We attend meetings frequently so newcomers may find the fellowship they seek. Look at the motivation of why they attended meetings. To help new people. So why are they doing it here? He's saying, myself and my family can be the bright spot in such congregations. So it's saying, even there, I can go there to be helpful. You'd be surprised how I'm not going to brag, but this is something I could brag about. I used to have these Jehovah's Witnesses that would come to my house all the time and knock on the door. And we gave these guys a couple of AA tapes. And one of the tapes, I think it said, "Don't pray for women. God's not a pimp." I mean, it was a little blasphemous. And I swear to God, I made the best friends out of these guys. These guys became like a couple of my really best friends. I didn't really go to their congregation, but they knew that we were living a spiritual life in Alcoholics Anonymous. And these guys are like, they're real straight-laced, right-wing religious guys, and they absolutely loved Alcoholics Anonymous. And those people had sent a lot of people to me to take through the steps. And I was so honored to do that because of the way I work with people in religious bodies. And I'm just saying, I'm a low bottom drunk, and to be able to be at least at that door, like Sam Shoemaker said, I stand at that door. And it's really important to understand that story. Read the poem, I stand at the door, take that thing apart and understand what it means. He says, I don't go too far in the door because I'm consumed with what's in the door. And he says, I don't go too far outside the door because I'm overcome with worldly clamors and I lose touch with what's in the door. And then he reveals, he says, it's a door that people are looking for in cold cities in the middle of the night. And he stands by this door to show them where the door is. And then he says that it's only their hand that can open the door. So he stands at the door and he puts their hand on that latch. And then he reveals in the poem that it's the door to God. But what's so interesting is when people say, my God's a doorknob and we judge him. Oh, it's just wild to really talk about that, how magical that is. Because if anything we can do in AA is we have a finger that points to a spiritual life. But sometimes we have to put their hand on that latch. So this is such a powerful piece right here. So it says, I may, not he may, but I may. How about me? I may bring new hope and courage to many a priest, rabbi, and minister who gives his all to minister in a troubled world. 1 out of 10 people these guys are dealing with are drunks or dope fiends. Sometimes the grandma goes to the rabbi or the priest talking about the grandkid. Haven't you ever noticed at 3 a.m, they always have those cliffside Malibu commercials? Because they know grandma's on there with her pocketbook and she'll pay 20 grand to save her little grandkid. And you know what all the treatment centers have in common? They all send their drunks to us. We have a direct line to recovery right here. We have a direct line to it. So here it is. We intend the foregoing as a helpful suggestion. For so far we are concerned, there is nothing obligatory, meaning we don't have to do it. As non-denominational people, right? Most of us are, because we're spiritual. AA takes us to a different level with this. Now, I will say one thing about religion, that my experience is that if people do religion in addition to AA, it works perfectly. My experience with new people in Alcoholics Anonymous is when they substitute religion for AA, a lot of times we lose them. That's just been my experience. That's why, again, this also has to be compatible with recovery. My career has to be compatible with my recovery. My relationship, including my family, has to be compatible with my recovery. And in terms of religious ideas, I believe that once I've had a spiritual awakening, this is very compatible. Okay? So it says, we cannot make up others' minds for them. Each individual should consult his own conscience. Continuing, okay? Middle of 132. We have been speaking to you of serious, sometimes tragic things. We have been dealing with alcohol in its worst aspect, okay? But we're not a glum lot. That's like one of those things that we always talk about, okay? If newcomers could see no joy or fun in our existence, they wouldn't want it. We absolutely insist on enjoying life. We try not to indulge in cynicism over the state of the nation. That word, look at that sentence, the state of the nation. It's the same 3 words that he uses in chapter 5. The Florida businessman laying in the sunshine, complaining about the state of the nation. We just saw it. The whole fellowship was divided about a year and a half ago. Think about it. We have to keep that stuff out of recovery. We try not to indulge in cynicism over the state of the nation, nor do we carry the world's troubles on our shoulders. When we see a man sinking into the mire that is alcoholism, we give him first aid. So this is about singleness of purpose if you're new. I think that it's very important for me to continue to redirect my purpose in Alcoholics Anonymous to one thing. When anyone anywhere reaches out for help, we want the hand of AA to be there. It's very important. In 1942, Bill Wilson wrote a little excerpt, and he said, our chief responsibility to the newcomer is an adequate presentation of the program of recovery. That was something that Bill stated very adamantly, and I believe that I always have to redirect back to that. It's very, very important because we start talking about politics, we talk about even athletics. Sports can divide somebody out of AA, believe me. It's that, some people are that touchy. So I've got to work on one thing. I talk about my drinking, I talk about the solution, I show them it's available, and I openly allow them to have that. I don't know how long I keep going, but I'm going to keep going a little bit more. 5 more minutes? Great. When we see a man sinking into the mire that is alcoholism, we give him first aid and place what we have at his disposal. For his sake, we do recount the almost relive the horrors of our past. So we share. And this is something that you'll see in working with others, that we don't typically lead with the spiritual feature of recovery. We talk about our drinking, okay? But for those of us who have tried to shoulder the entire burden and trouble of others, find we are overcome by them. That is such an important sentence because that's what happens to a lot of people. A lot of people in recovery are overwhelmed by sponsees. And what happens is I have to read those 39 directions in working with others, get a highlighter and go through that part of the book. And what it does is it shows me what to do, what not to do. My business with most people is to sit down with them maybe an hour and a half before a meeting once a week. Sometimes I'll take a whole weekend. I'll take them through the book. I'll read them the doctor's opinion. I'll go through Bill's story. I'll ask them if they see themselves. I will get them to write inventory. I will work them through this process. That's my business with them. If they think I'm their banker, I'm their therapist, they're going to live at my house. You know, people do it once in a while, but this is what happens. So if I'm shouldering the burden and trouble of others and I'm going to become overwhelmed with it, what's going to happen is it's going to kill me. And it's real easy for enabling and codependency to happen in sponsorship. It's really easy. And my experience is after I started working with others and learning how to work with others, and I don't mean to be, because I have to have compassion. I pray to God I never lose my compassion for people. It talks about 50% sobered up at once, 25% with some relapse, and the other 25% showed improvement. I need to be compassionate to all 3 of those guys. I went through residential treatment for alcoholism 28 times. I lived in institutions for 17 years. I spent $500,000 in a big book. My mom, I said it, moved and didn't leave a forwarding address. I was a complete animal. And I'm 23 years sober. I have a life in many ways beyond my wildest dreams. I'm not, when I say that, I am not kidding. And it's got nothing to do with the outside. It has to do with clarity. It has to do with peace. It has to do with power. And it has to do with purpose. That's what it has to do with. These are all intangible things. And I will tell you that this is such a powerful thing. So I'm going to continue on. It says, and I'm going to finish with this. So we think cheerfulness and laughter make for usefulness. Outsiders are sometimes shocked when we burst into merriment over seemingly tragic experiences out of our path. But why shouldn't we laugh? We've recovered and we've been given the power to help others. It's such a cool thing. I am telling you, I'll just finish with this last thing. I brag about this all the time. I was at LAX. I fly around a lot. This guy comes running up to me. He's wearing a slingshot t-shirt, full body tattoo, and he corners me at the airport. I'm dressed in a suit, and he says to me, "You don't remember me, do you?" And I looked at him and I thought, no, I don't remember you. And I'm thinking he's going to hit me up for money. I have no idea where this guy's coming from. And he's got these two kids with him and a lady that's standing by his side. And this is what he said to me. He said, 15 years ago, you spoke in a prison panel, and something you said changed my life. These are my beautiful daughters. This is my amazing wife. We want to thank you. And now we're crying. The mom and dad are crying, so I'm crying. The kids are crying. It's a scene at LAX. And I remember calling my sponsor. My sponsor's like, Adam, you have a big mouth and a good memory. Don't let it go to your head. And he hung up on me. But I'm going to tell you something that is compatible with this last thing. There are two dates in a human being's life: the day they're born and the day they find out why. And if your why is getting the trophy, getting the speedboat, getting the yacht, getting the Harley, getting the sports car, that stuff's all great. In fact, I wish I could have some of that stuff. I have to use other people's stuff. But the thing is, my why that day was that guy. And he wasn't a convict. He was a dad. He was a sober member of AA. He was a good husband. You could tell by the way his wife and his kids were loving on him. That guy had the world in his hands. And I got to experience that. I got to be part of that. That's the greatest gift I think I'll ever get. Because 30, 40 years, everyone on this platform is going to be dead. There's going to be nothing but dust. The question is, what are you going to do with it right now? Thank you.